Services Transportation Advisory Council. And Supervisors Lutweiler or Carpenter Harris, do either of you have an interest in this to where you would like to participate?
I mean, I could, whatever's easiest for them, I could change mine
Okay.
to make it easiest for whoever.
Okay. And Supervisor Frazier, can you give us an indication of what other committees the subject matter of their considerations best align with? I don't really even know what they do.
I'm trying to remember. It's one of the, I think this is one of those things where I haven't been involved in a whole lot of meetings. So I can't help you out much there. I think that, yeah, go ahead.
It's not a group that meets very often, quarterly at best. Department of Transportation oversees this committee, and it has to do with just everything to do with the transit and ride circulation in the county and being able to offer those services to impoverished persons.
Okay. All right. Actually, I think I'm supposed to open this item up for public comment. So I'm going to do that now. Do we have any public comment on item 5.1?
I have no raised hands.
Okay, and there's literally no one in the room. So I'll close public comment, bring it back to the board. And Supervisor Carpenter Harris said she's willing to serve as the second primary. Supervisor Gogan will remain as an alternate.
And hopefully they send us an email when they have a meeting scheduled, because I didn't even realize I was still the primary on that one.
Okay. Okay. Item 5.2, grand jury report, Board of Supervisors response. The requested action is approve the board's response to the grand jury report, DER 2022-001, abandoned vehicle abatement report. So I created this report, and the way that I bring it forward, well, let's see. I guess if anything, you've seen the backup data. I start with if there are questions of any of the supervisors.
As we go through 5.2 and I guess 5.3, Jill.
So just general questions right now, not a deep dive into discussion. Okay, then I'll open this up for public comment. Is there anyone on Zoom wishing to make comment?
I have no raised hands, no chats.
Okay. What's that?
I'm talking to my.
You're okay? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll close public comment and bring it back to the board. All right. So the findings, there were only 3 findings that we were required to respond to, 4, 6, and 8. And I listed them there. Due to the AVA program self-funding capability without using general funds, there's currently no routine annual evaluation of the abandoned vehicle abatement program by the Board of Supervisors or oversight by any board or community stakeholders. The Clean California grant is available to supplement the program, but Trinity County has no funding for the request and administration of this grant opportunity. And there is a lack of information available in the media or on the county website for Trinity County residents to report an abandoned vehicle or legally abate an abandoned vehicle on their property. And to me, I responded that I would agree with those findings. So board members can weigh in on one or all 3 of those. Are we in agreement?
I agree with that.
Yes.
Okay. All right, moving on to the recommendations. To me, and in discussion with our interim CAO, it does seem unreasonable for a 10-week interim CAO to make a programmatic decision of ongoing outcomes on behalf of an incoming CAO. And so my recommendation is that all 5 of the grand jury's recommendations would be evaluated for program development by our incoming CEO, Trent Tuttle, and returned. We are offered 6 months to make that happen. So that would need to be completed no later than June 22nd, 2023. Any discussion on that?
Yeah, well,
So it would need to be, I don't know how that works. Council, can you advise? I'm not exactly sure. Does this, if we move this forward today, are we saying that a program would be developed or recommendations brought back by the CAO? And would that need to be a couple of meetings prior to our kind of due date of June 22nd? Or how does that typically work?
Sorry, is the question just whether you?
It's a process question
Yeah.
with regard to grand jury where we're saying we don't have capacity. Their recommendations are certainly founded, and it really requires some program development,
Okay.
which an interim CAO really does not have capacity to do in such a limited time frame. So what my response is that because this is unreasonable to ask of an interim, we have 6 months to complete some kind of program development that we would then bring back to satisfy the grand jury's request.
Okay.
That due date, given 6 months, would be June 22nd. But should we look at the calendar of board meetings and pick a date certain that this would be completed by for consideration by the board?
Yeah, you can do that.
And that's all, I think that's all you're required to do is establish what you're going to be, or that you're going to, parameters of what you're going to further analyze, and that the board will have it for consideration on this date, because we can't say that we're going to pass something.
Right.
So if somebody makes a motion that we're going to direct staff to further analyze these and present something to the board by June 22nd, we've already basically taken the action required as of the time we give that direction, and establish a timeline and direction. That's what we have to do.
Okay. So,
You have a date for a session?
The 2 meetings in June are June 6th and June 20th. Do you want the May date?
I would say we could do no later than June 6th. We could perhaps state it that way. That gives us the June 20th date for any further consideration.
Well, as long as you have it on the agenda, we'll take some kind of action on it, whatever day it's there. So you can, if you can
Let's
do
say
6 or 20.
Let's do no later than June 6th.
Fair enough.
And this motion, when we say staff, we don't have to define who all that includes, because
Well, you
really this
can-
is direction to CAO.
Yeah, you can, we'll give direction to the new CAO when he gets here, and then he'll be the one in charge.
About 2 months, right? He comes in April sometime.
So he's gonna have to hop and pop.
Okay,
It's like the
So we got
19th.
2
or the
months.
20th.
all right. So, Dan, do you want to go ahead and put that into a motion?
Let me see. I will make a motion that we I gotta go back to my agenda, because we're actually approving your response, correct?
Correct.
And providing direction to staff to go ahead, Rick, because I just lost my.
So basically, all we're doing is we're approving as presented, except altering my date, returned
Yep.
no later than June 22nd. So we're approving with an altered date of no later than June 6th.
Okay, so I think you just made a motion yourself,
I
and I
did.
will second it.
All right. All
We
right.
got there.
Supervisor Frazier,
Aye.
Chairman Cox.
Aye.
Supervisor Weiler,
Aye.
Supervisor Gogan,
Aye.
Supervisor Carpenter Harris.
Aye. And then Ashley, in your magic notebook of things to not be forgotten, can we make a note here that this is something that our incoming CAO needs to be well briefed on, timely? All right, moving to item 5.3. And as we do so, we are going to trade our general counsel for our in-house counsel, our district attorney, David Brady. And so we will remove what we hope would not be an uncomfortable situation for you, Mr. Cameron.
Sure.
All right. And thank you, Mr. Brady, for giving us some of your very precious time. Appreciate it. All right. Item 5.3, Grand Jury Report, Board of Supervisors requested action. Approve the board's response to the Grand Jury Report, JUR 2022-001, County Council Review. And I'm going to, since this report was prepared, actually, let's see, let's start this way. Are there any general questions for clarity by any board members before we open this to public comment? Okay. Is there any public comment on this item?
Yeah, Keith.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Good afternoon, supervisors and Madam Chair. My main concern today, of course, you all know that I've had problems with this grand jury report for a long time, and I want to commend Dan on his answering. But some of the findings here, I think there's one in finding one. I think, Dan, you missed something here. Finding one, a series of county ordinances enacted to regulate CCLs from 16 to 21 consistently failed to comply with CEQA requirements. That is absolutely not true. Every county ordinance complied with CEQA, was vetted through the Planning Commission and vetted through the supervisors with finding of facts and compliance with CEQA. So I would respectfully request you change that to wholeheartedly disagree. I'll run out of time here if I go into all the problems with this, but on number 3, I'll say they stay part of the 21 court order in the TAA case was to cease and desist from issuing and reissuing CCLs. They failed to mention that as part of the 2019 case, that it was only for issuing new licenses and not reissuing. So this whole lawsuit, I think it's important to remember, is over less than about 15 new licenses that the county made a mistake and issued. What else do I have here? Again, I wholeheartedly hope that this is used for the future boards or general grand juries to look at of how not to do one. Very few, if any, of the players were talked about or talked to in this, and you can tell in their responses that, or in the findings, that they're just really out of line and sort of embarrassing what they've done here. And again, Dan, I appreciate your going through. I could go into a bunch more little stuff, but I lost that privilege. So I would just really appreciate that you correct finding number 1. And at least for the record, we know that the county did do its due diligence, did follow CEQA, and did do the ordinances. Otherwise, people would have had 90 days to appeal all those, and I'm sure that would have been appealed. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I have no other raised hands, no new chat.
Okay, with that, we will close public comment and bring it back to the board. So I think what we will do is take each one of these and open it up to board comments in order. So on finding number 1, a series of county ordinances enacted to regulate CCLs from 16 to 21 consistently fail to comply with CEQA requirements to identify and mitigate for the full range of environmental impacts associated with commercial cannabis cultivation. The Board of Supervisors during that period relied on the current county council for legal guidance. So Supervisor Fraser, I'll start with you. Your original response was to agree, and any comments?
Yeah, well, first off, I want to make it clear that we're not even required to respond to all these findings. I responded to the findings on my own. They asked for a response to their requests. So I just want to make that clear
Okay, thank
to
you.
begin with.
Okay.
But finding number 1 is I did struggle with, because the county did play by the rules. The issue I had here is the failure to comply with CEQA. The state didn't comply with CEQA. They said there was no need. There's a difference also between the program complying with CEQA and the ordinances complying with CEQA. And so I kind of punted on finding number 1. So I was thinking about just erasing it, but then I thought, well, that would look funny if I only started responding with ones I disagreed with wholly. So number 1 is a punt.
Mhm.
I don't think that the county did anything wrong in the way that we did our ordinances. I don't necessarily agree that the ordinances took into account all the CEQA aspects because the state didn't require it at that time. The state punted on CEQA. That's their prerogative. So that's what I had with finding number 1.
Mhm.
Don't really wholly agree with it, but I do agree that we did have the same county council, and I do agree that there were issues, but we did follow the rules when we created those ordinances.
So you're more comfortable with somewhat agree?
Yeah, or somewhat disagree. I pretty much disagreed with most stuff in this grand jury report. Well, like I said, number 1's a punt, because I almost didn't respond to it at all.
Understandable.
But you did. Same with number 2. I wasn't going to respond to number 2 either, because it's like.
Okay, let's stick with number 1 for just a second. I
Okay.
think that the operative word here in this finding is ordinances. And again, I didn't serve during the enactment of those ordinances, but what we've seen come before us makes the ordinance exempt from CEQA because the project will need to comply with CEQA. So the
The
question is,
ordinances-
was
the
the
ord-
ordinance the project, or were the sites the project?
And the ordinances, as far as I'm concerned, the ordinances were compliant with CEQA. The projects for the first, I don't know how many years we dealt with cannabis, we heard constantly from public comment and from people involved looking at it at the state level that it's CEQA deferred, it's CEQA this, we're going to deal with CEQA in July. You know, there was always, the state never would give us a date for CEQA compliance. And then we could get into a big giant discussion on CEQA. How do you go back and do CEQA on an existing project, which all of our ordinances were crafted around allowing or taking existing grows and making them licensed. So CEQA is kind of out the window if you already have a project. So that's why I punted on number 1. You can erase it from the whole response would be what I would really like to do. Is not even respond to it.
Based on the fact that we're not.
They didn't ask us to respond to their findings.
Then I would say if we weren't asked to respond to the findings, maybe we just remove all the findings and responses.
The problem I have with that is some of these findings your findings are supposed to be findings of fact. And I don't know a polite way to say it. Some of these are findings of fiction.
Okay.
So there are some that I think have to be responded to. Number 1, number 2.
Well, I'm sorry, just to say, so do you want to just say no response?
On finding number one, I'm fine with that.
You don't want to get, if there's not a requirement, but there are some that we want to respond to, perhaps it's no response to the ones that we don't feel like we need to weigh in on because there's whatever reason.
I'm okay with that. Like I said, the reason I didn't just erase finding number one and finding number two from this whole thing was because it's like, I don't want it to just look like I only responded to stuff I disagree with.
Mhm.
And I don't really remember what finding two is, but we'll get to that in a minute.
So I think if anything, I don't like kicking something out just to kick it out. I think that what we are saying here is that there isn't clarity with what exactly this statement means as presented. And so to say, I feel more comfortable with somewhat disagrees. I'm
Yeah.
trying to find our options, and the way this is laid out becomes difficult to see them. To just say, well, I'm not going to respond to some, but I'm going to respond to the others.
Well, that's why I
Yeah,
didn't
I
just erase
appreciate
it.
exactly that you're
But
doing that.
I mean, I could wholly disagree and I could give a perfectly logical explanation why. But I don't know exactly what their finding is saying is the biggest issue. It's like, we had a settlement that said we didn't comply with CEQA, but our ordinances, so we have it's like, how do you say we did comply with CEQA? That's what I feel happened. But at the same time, we had a judgment that said we didn't. So personally, I wholly disagree with that statement. But there's a judgment that says we did not comply with CEQA. But that's also the judgment says we didn't comply with the settlement agreement. That's a difficult thing. It's not clear to me what they're asking.
So I don't really see how we can sit here as a board and say that we disagree with what is it Superior Court? Is that where we went?
Oh, I can disagree with anybody I want to.
Sure. I
You
kind of
may.
agree with what Jill says. I think you've just got the Superior
I
Court.
think that, go ahead, I'm sorry.
And I think that, I mean, myself, I can disagree with everybody, and sometimes I do. But if this got to the level that it did, I think we owe a response, whether it be agree, disagree, partially agree, wholly don't agree. But as a board, I think this went over our head and we should make a decision on how we feel about this as a board.
Well, and that's what I say. This finding was the reason I punted on it was because it's like, okay, they said their finding was that we didn't comply with CEQA. I think the court's finding was that we didn't comply with a settlement agreement. I think we did everything that we were required to in those ordinances, but I had a hard time right there with saying I wholly disagree when the court kind of said we screwed up. So that was.
I'm comfortable with agree.
I'm comfortable with agree.
I'm comfortable with agree.
Ready?
Your punt worked.
Well, then I'm comfortable as completely erasing that one, but we can move on to.
So we'll just,
Madam Chair.
But we
I'm
have-
sorry
we have
to
closed
interrupt
public
you, but
comment,
shut-
and so we won't be taking public comment at this time.
You know the rules by now.
Okay, finding 2, failure of the county to properly address CEQA resulted in a lawsuit filed by concerned county residents, TAA, seeking to compel compliance. After an initial settlement in which the county paid $95,000 in the litigants' attorney fees in 2019, the county failed to honor the terms of the settlement and ultimately was ordered to pay an additional $339,185 in costs and attorney fees in 2021. The current county council provided legal guidance to the Board of Supervisors throughout this period, and the response was agree. So we know that this is what Dan would like it to say, and so Supervisor Lutweiler?
Yes.
Supervisor Cogan,
One more time.
do you agree with this responsive agree, or would you like to see that as something else?
I agree.
And Supervisor Carpenter Harris? Okay. We will leave that one as a 5-0. Finding number 3, as a part of the 2021 court order in the TA case, the county was ordered to desist from issuing or reissuing any CCL until CEQA compliance is achieved. Numerous Trinity County farmers found themselves unable to operate legally through no fault of their own, and several filed legal action against the county. In addition, numerous cannabis abatement cases against farmers who continued to operate without licenses were filed by the county. Those cases, both by the county and against the county, have and continue to represent significant additional legal costs to the county. Response was disagree wholly. After the court order in the TAA case, no cannabis cultivators initiated new litigation against Trinity County. Additionally, legal costs associated with notices of violation are the responsibility of the violator to pay. And Supervisor Lutweiler, do you agree with the response provided?
I'm just trying to understand the difference between a finding here that said there were lawsuits and the response that says there were not. So
There were not. So that's why I disagreed wholly with that is the county, well, even sitting through closed session, you should have be able to see that there were no new lawsuits by cultivators after that happened. And I looked into that. I reached out to county council for one to see, it's like, hey, what new ones have we had? There are no new cases.
they were all from before, is that what
They
you're
were
saying?
all from before. And so that is just an absolutely not factual fact.
So you're comfortable with the response? Supervisor Gogan?
My recollection is there was no additional lawsuits brought at that time. So I would disagree wholly, I guess, or agree with Dan's response.
And Supervisor Harris. Okay. All right, finding 4, from fiscal year 2016-17 through fiscal year 21-22. The county paid approximately $4.5 million in legal costs. This total includes $435,185 in settlements and award to litigants, $94,641 paid to special counsel retained for the TAA case, and nearly $4 million paid directly to county council. Response, disagree partially. $216,287 passed through county council to pay other outside council investigations, leaving $3.6 million being paid to county council over a 6-year period, or an average of $600,000 per fiscal year. So I would say, Supervisor Frazier, since you looked into this so carefully to be able to separate those costs out, could you share with us what your research showed?
Well, it pretty much showed right
What's
there.
here?
But, and some of that stuff, I don't think we're going to disclose in a public meeting,
Okay,
what passed through county council. That's privileged. That's why it passed through county council.
okay,
I'm fine with this.
okay. I don't have knowledge of those details, and so I'm fine with it. Yes. You as well. Okay. Okay. Our finding 5, during the period considered herein, 16 to 22, the Board of Supervisors of County Council displayed a tendency to conduct business in secret. The Board of Supervisors failed to consistently report decisions and actions taken in closed session as stipulated in state and county statutes, and County Council consistently invoked attorney-client privilege to conceal information ranging from services billed to the opinion of special counsel regarding the disposition of the TAA case. Response, disagree partially. The current board has no knowledge of decisions or actions taken in closed session prior to January of 2021, so cannot agree or disagree. Since January of 2021, any actions on the TAA case were voted on in open session, and discussion and legal advice leading to those actions are privileged information. Supervisor Whitwell?
Hold on, I'm just reading this one part again.
Sure. While he's reading, Supervisor Gogan, do you agree with that response? Or? Okay, sure.
I'm okay with this. I think, again, it's a lot of it is caught up in the wording of this specifically. Clearly, there's members of the board that were here in last year that can speak to what happened in closed session. Even though there aren't people that could speak to before those last 2 years. But this specifically refers to failed to consistently report on things related to the TAA case. And so what I'm hearing from your research and your experience on the board, this is what happened. So I'm okay with that then.
I would just say that as a member of the public, I observed things that happened during this time period where I did not sit on the board. And as a member of the public, I felt what the grand jury appears to me to be expressing here. And that was that information that was reported out of closed session was repeatedly requested and not provided. And neither was there even a reason given as to why it wasn't being provided. It was simply, it just was not responded to. There was just radio silence. And so I feel this I feel this from the seat of a constituent, and it's troublesome to me.
I was in the same seat as Jill. We both had almost a year run up from the time we were voted in to the time we sat here. And I feel the same way as you just said, that, I mean, consistently is a term that I don't, what does consistently mean? 4 to 10, 7 to 10. But I do feel that what you just said was the public perception and also my perception as a constituent in this county.
And I guess I would take the word consistent. And again, it's difficult with semantics because a decision was asked for a report out on more than one occasion. And the response was consistent. There was no response. But to say that consistently meant multiple decisions, then consistently does not apply. So,
Chair, can I just ask, so I didn't experience what you're experiencing. So knowing what, obviously sitting on this side of the table and being in closed sessions, the things that were being asked for by the public that no response was being given, response should have been given?
in my opinion, yes.
Okay, so should we modify this response to acknowledge that in some fashion?
In my opinion, yes.
Okay.
Mine also.
One of the things I tried to do while I was doing this is not to rely on perception or assumption. I relied on what I knew and what I could find out. Okay, what I know for a fact, since I've been sitting on this board in regards to TAA case, which is expressly called out, we had one vote as this board that since we did it in open session and anything else that was related to that, all the discussions leading up to that, it's privileged information. So that was my response. What they did in 2016 through before we became a board, I'm not going to respond to. It doesn't, I can't. I don't know what happened in closed session. I can assume, I'm not going to. And that's just, this to me should only be factual. And it's not easy to respond to something like this when, I mean, seriously, I spent 2 almost entire days sitting in my office, which is the only time in the history of being a supervisor I've spent that much time in my office, plus another week or more every morning trying to find out what is fact. What do I know and how do I respond to this? I didn't want to just come out and say, well, I don't agree with you. There has to be a reason. And the only reason I have for saying what I said here is the fact that while I was here, that's what happened. What happened in 2016, 2017, I have no knowledge, and I will never have any actual factual knowledge unless somebody was to tell me what happened in closed session, and I won't even ask.
So I'm going to ask a question to council if I may, because I don't remember where I read this, if it's someplace in Brown Act or if it is in our governance manual or covered in Rosenberg's rules of order. But there are directives as to how the board is required to come out of closed session. And when a vote has been taken, my recollection is having read that that vote is to be reported out. Can you help me with that?
I believe you're correct.
So in my opinion, what was asked repeatedly in open session and even asked directly by the Trinity Journal of the board at that time, they were asking to know the vote, and the vote was not given to them. And in my opinion, that makes me uncomfortable. And as a citizen, it made me quite uncomfortable.
And I would just say, Dan, I mean, I respect, first of all, thank you for all the work that you put into this to give us facts as you worked hard to recover them. In the end, this is the response from the board. So the board collectively has to feel comfortable in what it says. And I'm in the midst, maybe about 30% of the way through the ethics training required for some of the committees I've been assigned to. And one of the things it specifically calls out is ethics requirements go beyond what's legally required and what is perception. And so I think if we as a board feel that the perception was that we were not, we being the board that some of us weren't on at the time, we're talking about a time we weren't here,
Well,
but that,
none of
but
us-
if we want to just indicate, we understand the importance of transparency and of following the rules and reading out and conveying that information, and we're committed to doing that. It doesn't even have to be a backward looking thing, but it could be a forward looking thing. If that makes the people, again, I'm going by not having experience. I wasn't watching the board meetings back then, so I don't know what you're referring to. But hearing you, that seems like something that doesn't try to adjust the facts or say we know facts that we don't, but indication, a sentiment and a commitment to strong ethics going forward.
Mhm.
That's
Mhm.
that's up to you.
I would agree with that. And it would seem to me that that would be the intent of a grand jury, is to, again, we can't change the past, but they're expressing what they too are uncomfortable with and asking that their board, their governing body would lend to them a degree of transparency they did not feel previously.
So can we say on the bottom of the response, henceforth?
Well, this is just, these are only findings, so there's no action either. But my question would be, okay, because you said that the perception is that they didn't report out votes, but do we have any knowledge of that? I mean,
How do we not? We were all, unless you weren't following what went on, we were all members of the public at that time, unless we weren't here yet. But if you were here and following it, you have a perception of what happened. You have a public's perception of what happened. You don't have a board member's perception.
if we don't have we can have a perception, and that's why it's not like I wholly disagreed. That I said, I specifically stated that we don't have the knowledge to agree or disagree with what happened with the previous board. You might feel like you have the knowledge to agree or disagree. I don't, because I wasn't setting up here, and the perception can be a lot different than the actual fact. So I'm not going to assume anything that happened with the previous board. I will answer to what we have done. That was my, and I said, if you guys aren't comfortable with saying that we can't agree or disagree with what happened with the previous board, that's different, I guess, but I don't know how there's no way I could find that I know what happened with the previous board. I mean, it's just something that I could not do. How can I make that finding? So my answer was, we have no knowledge of that.
Okay.
My recollection is the public overwhelmingly perception was that we didn't previously report out on the lawsuit. And if we're talking about perception, and maybe this is something because we sat so long prior to being voted in and then actually sitting up here, that we paid a little more attention, I guess. But it was overwhelming that the public felt shorted by the board not reporting out. I think it was asked for multiple times at open session, and my recollection tells me that there was not a adequate answer given because it seemed to persist for quite a while. So that's my answer to that.
Supervisor Carpenter, you have thoughts?
No.
I think, Supervisor Fraser, I totally hear what you're saying, and I appreciate the wholeheartedness with which you are trying to give deference to conversations to which we were not privy. I really do appreciate that. The other piece that I bring here is that I just want to, I think if anything, I'll pause here because I'm going to give these comments at some point anyway. Our system of governance provides for us systems of checks and balances, and I view the grand jury as one of those. They are not a small group. It is a large body. And while they may divide to smaller groups to tackle their issues, and I don't have any idea what size or how they do that, when that group comes back, while we five may have no personal firsthand knowledge and they are not directly speaking to the specific five of us, they are speaking to the collective board of supervisors. We five have the ability to hand them the intent of what they are asking. And what I want to hand them is, I hear you. I felt what you are feeling with you. And what I would offer you is my perspective going forward, in that I'm doing the best as chair. This year, I see what that feels like to carefully note, what can I say without violating the closed session confidentiality? And try to be careful to say all of that.
Well,
And I feel like they're deserving of that response from this collective body, regardless.
the question I would have for you then, how would you respond to that finding? Would you agree? Because then you're saying that we have failed to report out votes that we never took. Or would you partially disagree that we've done everything right and what happened in the past is not really, we're not privy to that. And that's what I said. It's like, okay, things might have happened in the past, but I don't know personally what happened in here. And so I'm not going to put that in an official public document that, yep, they screwed up when I don't know it. I do know that we didn't, and that's what my response is. What happened in 2016, 2017 is not something that I'm going to respond to. I mean, and we also have to go back to the fact that these are findings. This is not their recommendations and how we're supposed to respond to this. These are their findings. And I disagree partially with that finding. The part I disagree with that finding is that we have done anything incorrect in our dealing with the TAA case, because the only action we took was a vote in public. So we didn't do anything incorrect. And that's my disagreement with that finding.
And
So
So, but Dan or Supervisor Frazier, what I was hearing is maybe there's nothing to change necessarily about what you put on here, but maybe there's an additional statement that addresses
well, I don't,
sentiment perception. Is that? Go ahead.
I was merely responding to their findings. And if they had an issue that they wanted to, if they had an action requested, they should have put that down in the recommendation section rather than in the findings section, because what was asked for in the response was only that we respond to the recommendations. Like I said earlier, the reason I responded to these findings is because in reading them, some of the findings were not factually accurate. And how can you make a response to the recommendation without addressing the inaccuracy in the findings? Because the inaccuracies in the findings are what lead to the recommendations that are hard to deal with. So personally, I don't think there's anything wrong with my response that, yeah, we didn't do anything wrong. That's the part I disagreed with, was the fact that it says that this has occurred. Well, that says during the 2016 to 2022, or, it's like, we're not doing that as a board. And that's why I disagreed.
so I guess what I'm going to do at this point is it is my job to make sure this moves forward and we don't just sit and dwell. And I could completely empathize with, you've put a lot of time and effort into all of this. And I would imagine that from your perspective, you feel a sense of kind of ownership over this, as any of us would. Acknowledging that, I would say at this point, there are 5 perspectives that need to be equally weighted. And so we have your perspective here in this statement. And now I'm just going to ask if each of the remaining board members, do you want to leave it as it is? Do you want to change it in some way? Do you want to add something to it? So Supervisor Lutweiler, you had alluded to a potential of wanting to maybe add a statement, or
I
ask
just
you-
say I'm open to adding a statement based on what you were describing. I don't feel compelled to need, because I didn't experience something that you're describing.
Okay.
So,
Supervisor Gogan?
I would add that what I just said earlier, that there was the perception of not reporting out prior to myself being on the board in January 2021.
Okay. And Supervisor
Are you
Carpenter's?
speaking just to this single item or to the
Yeah.
whole item?
I am at this point speaking to this one response to this one item.
Then I will agree with the way it's written right now. And I also agree that in the recommendations and the response to the recommendations, that's where we can say that we will.
Okay. So I see where you're coming from, and Supervisor Lutweiler, if Supervisor Gogan and I agree with his statement that there was a perception of not reporting out. And is that something that you would like to see added in, or you would more say, let's just leave this and deal with specifics as we move forward?
I'm really in the position of saying I'm more open to, there's something that the two of you think should be there based on your experience. So if you think that we should acknowledge a public perception and a commitment to moving forward, fine. If you want to hold that to later, fine. I understand where Supervisor Frazier is coming from, and I understand what you're describing to me as something that you might feel compelled to call out, and I'll support that if that's what you want to do.
I would like to include a statement that acknowledges a perception, and Supervisor Gogan.
I agree.
would- Okay. So,
I still have, I'm going to make one more statement here. I have an issue with a finding of perception. These are findings of fact. So unless you can say this is a fact, I have a difficult time with it. If we were down here in recommendations and responses, that's different. You can use perceptions there, but these are findings of fact.
okay, so it is a fact that I sat in multiple board meetings and observed my governing body unwilling to report out when directly asked to do so by as much as the local newspaper, asking for what law requires that they do. So
Okay,
that's a
that,
fact.
I can understand that's a fact, but do you have knowledge that they had anything to report? That's where I fall, is like, the perception, yes, was that they were doing something wrong. It was not, nothing was copacetic, but a fact. We do not have any facts of what happened on this dais because none of us were there. And that's,
So I can appreciate what you're saying, but it is also possible that, to me, it was an expectation that if there was nothing to report out, then tell the public that there was nothing to report out and why. Don't just give radio silence. That is a fact that I feel needs to be acknowledged.
Vote.
Yeah, let's do. I just want to, we need to move this forward. We've
Well,
heard all of the perceptions. There's 5 people that get to choose collectively.
okay, well, next question is how do you change that? Because you have to do that right now. You have to amend my response right now. It has to be done. So you have to come up with the language that says that you have to do it now. You have to do it on the fly and it has to be included in this. So that, I mean, we can't just say, okay, there's a perception that there was something. There can be perceptions that there was misdoing, but if you don't like my response, you have to fix it.
Okay, we will fix it. So a suggestion that I would make would be to state that on more than one occasion, the Board of Supervisors were asked to report out a closed session vote and whether or not, are you getting this down? I can type faster than I can. Just 1 second. Type it in the email. Okay. All right. On more than one occasion, the Board of Supervisors was publicly asked to report out.
Should you put the time frame so that? it's
Yes,
not a
on more
general
than one
Board of Supervisors, but
occasion,
lock it in there?
following the TAA settlement, 2019 TAA settlement agreement. The Board of Supervisors was publicly asked to report out of closed session as to their vote regarding that settlement. The board did not respond with, I would say it is acknowledged because that is my intent, is simply to acknowledge what the grand jury found. It is acknowledged that the board did not respond with the clarity that was requested.
Was a journal not factual? That they asked and got nothing back.
Correct.
Is that incorporated in your?
I could incorporate that. On more than one occasion following, the Board of Supervisors was publicly asked, including by the Trinity Journal, to report out of closed session as to their vote regarding that settlement. It is acknowledged that the board did not respond with the clarity that was requested. Does that satisfy? Supervisor Carpenter Harris?
Yeah.
Supervisor Lutwiler?
Yes.
Do you still disagree partially, or do you agree with that finding?
I'm fine with everything you said.
I would leave it as disagree partially. I would leave the previous, all of the statements that you have, and I would add this statement to it for clarity.
I'd agree.
Can you read it again?
Yes.
please?
So I'll read in its entirety, if adopted, this is what it would say. Disagree partially. The current board has no knowledge of decisions or actions taken in closed session prior to January of 2021. So
You can't have both. You can't have no knowledge and still say that you have knowledge.
we have no knowledge as public citizens because we were not offered even a piece of knowledge.
But can we make a statement as a board from from where we sat as citizenry? I don't,
Let's,
it seems like it's cross-pollinating our,
I
Okay.
really, you know what I mean? It's difficult to say you have no knowledge, but then to say that there's a perception. This,
This is not a perception, Supervisor Frazier. This is, it's on record. You can go back and watch those meetings.
okay, but I'm fine with that, but you can't leave in there that we can't, it says, my answer was, we can't answer that because we weren't privy to what was happening in closed session. So you can't leave that in there that we can't answer because we don't know what happened in closed session and say that we think that there was something bad that happened. So you're gonna have to,
So I didn't
so-
say there was something bad that happened.
And I would translate this way, Dan, or Supervisor Frazier, your statement is speaking to, we don't have knowledge about decisions or actions that took place in closed session. Her comment is not saying that she knows what took place in closed session. It's that in open session, when a request was made for clarity about what happened, no answer was given. So there may or may not have been something to report on, but that the response was so either, it sounds like non-existent, that is the problem that's being called out, not disagreeing with your statement.
Mhm.
Does that, you understand?
yeah, I think we're spending way too much time on the findings personally.
Yeah,
And,
me too.
Basically, you could take it off, just end it, disagree partially and, you know, but
So
as you wish.
we are going to move forward, and unless either one of the four of you want to rescind your vote, we are adding in the sentences as I read them. If one of the four of you want to change your mind, now is your moment. Okay, moving on to finding number 6. The 2016-17 grand jury also found that the Board of Supervisors failed to provide meaningful or accurate reports regarding business conducted in closed session. In particular, the 2016-17 grand jury found that the Board of Supervisors reported that closed sessions for personnel evaluation of county council were held 11 times in the span of 1 year. Response: the current board has no knowledge of closed session meetings in 2016-2017. So if that is the way that this statement is there, and that's the grand jury's finding, then basically, I guess we're deferring to their findings, saying that they have knowledge we don't have.
I was saying we have no knowledge of that. So
I have no knowledge of that.
I don't either.
Finding 7, county council advised the Board of Supervisors to reject a potential $30,000 settlement with TA in 2021, ultimately resulting in a court order for the county to pay TAA more than 10 times as much. In doing so, county council stifled information, casting doubt on county council's advice, and assumed full responsibility for the TAA case. Response: disagree wholly. County council advised that the Board of Supervisors should not enter into a contract with TAA while they were suspended because, I believe that should say they,
that's,
did not have legal standing. County council at no time advised that the Board of Supervisors should not enter into an agreement upon TAA curing their suspension, and repeatedly stated it is ultimately the board's decision whether or not to settle with TAA. In regards to stifling information, casting doubt on county council's advice, there is an assumption that special counsel would have disagreed with the advice given.
Weather needs to be corrected. Different kind of weather. Just change that.
We're having weather right now.
Yeah.
I do not disagree wholly with that statement, with what happened during that time period. I do agree that I did hear county council say it is ultimately the board's decision. But I also heard the county council encourage the board that there was to act in a moment when, to my knowledge, there had been information provided that that hearing would take place. And so I don't disagree wholly. I would have to reread it to see if I even disagree partially. Other thoughts?
So starting at the top right there, county council advised the board of supervisors should not enter into contract with TA while they're suspended. Brings up a big question for me. From what I
So
said-
without, I'm going to just see if we can streamline just this. If I read the finding again without reading the response, I would like to hear your response just based on that finding, without considering, like, don't consider the finding and the suggested response. I would like to hear your response. Can we do that? Okay. County council advised the Board of Supervisors to reject a potential $30,000 settlement with TA in 2021, ultimately resulting in a court order for the county to pay TA more than 10 times as much. And so doing, county council stifled information, casting doubt on county council's advice. It's a weird statement. Advice and assumed full responsibility for the TAA case.
Stifle's a strong word.
Mhm.
Besides that, I would agree. I don't, stifle's kind of like the word we used before. You know, it's. One thing out of 100, it could be a game changer.
Mhm.
So I think stifled, with that word being thrown out, I think. Well. All right, yeah, I agree. Well, I would say, I would say that if we were advised to accept the $30,000 settlement, and I was in on that, we didn't, and I don't remember going against their wishes.
One suggestion that we could do, since everything in this finding is contained in a public record, we could simply refer to that.
Say defer to the public
Mhm.
record dated such as.
Is that what you would
Yeah.
like to do? Supervisor Carpenter Harris, is that what you would like to do?
I don't know. I'd like to hear what Dan has to say.
Mhm.
I watched the video, that segment of video about 15 times. And everything that is in my response is factual. County council never advised us not to take that agreement. County council advised us not to settle with someone who was not a legal entity at that time. County council never advised us that we shouldn't settle once they were cured. And that question was brought up. It's like, hey, when they get this figured out, it was even brought up by me. When they get this lined out, can we then re-enter negotiations and council said, yeah, we can do that. But the issue was she would not give us advice to enter into a contract with an entity that didn't exist. So that, my response to that was accurate. And whether it's disagreeing partially or wholly, I mean, I guess you could agree with the fact that we ended up having to pay more in the future. That's the only part I agreed with, but it was so tied in with the rest. That's why I said I disagreed wholly, is because what was stated in this finding was not accurate. And I have an issue with that.
So I too rewatched the meeting, and you did bring up those points, but besides what you are bringing up at this moment, there were other pieces of that conversation that also led to the determination or as to how we moved forward that day. There were other possibilities that were shut down and not allowed to be said in that meeting. And so I am more comfortable saying disagree. For me, I'm more comfortable saying disagree partially and deferring to the April 6th meeting rather than trying to sum up everything that happened, because I think that in summing it up, there is conjecture as to exactly the nuances of how that did go versus how it could have gone.
A question for you, Chair. So if you were looking at the existing response, you would change disagree wholly to disagree partially. Would you include some or all of the rest of his stuff and add the part about defer to the public record, or is there some part of rest of his response that you would remove?
What I think is missing here is that County Council had knowledge that that issue would be cleaned up. And Supervisor Frazier even asked in that day. And to me, the proper response of guidance would have been to give it the couple of weeks, which in essence really only needed a day. It is ironic that it was actually cured that day. And that could have changed the whole course of events. And so I'm not comfortable just looking as though there's no responsibility to be taken there. I think there is responsibility to be taken, and I wish to acknowledge what they're stating. So to your question specifically, County Council at no time advised that the board should not enter into an agreement upon TA curing their suspension. That is not my recollection. I do recall a repeated statement of ultimately it's the board's decision, but that statement was on the heels of a strong encouragement and also repetition that today they don't appear to be an entity, which actually ended up being not true. So for me, I would remove. I would say ultimately, I would get rid of all the rest of that. I would probably keep the first sentence and refer to the public record, which
Video's
isn't
not
a
a
formal
public
public record. We've been through that. Our videotapes are not our legal backup document. They are there as a reference. I mean, but they're not our, I'm not how you state that. They're not our legal document of record. So to know that those are forever in perpetuity going to be available for viewing, I don't think it's necessarily a true statement. I would take that first sentence and then I would finish it with that there was a statement if it's ultimately the board's decision, and I would get rid of the rest if it were at me.
So can you read it the way you would like it to?
I would say that I disagree partially. County Council advised that the Board of Supervisors should not enter into a contract with TA while they were suspended because they did not have legal standing, but did advise that it is ultimately the board's decision.
And so what part of that do you agree with? Of the finding number 7?
County Council advised the board to reject. I agree with all of it, except I do agree with Supervisor Goglan. I feel like the word stifled is awfully strong. I would say that other information was highlighted with more strongly than was highlighted more so to just consider that you couldn't enter into an agreement with them rather than, in time this could be cured. There's a potential, maybe you should just wait. I don't feel that both of those options were presented with equal weight for board consideration.
But the finding reads stifled.
Well,
So,
and the finding also says that.
And so that's my reason for disagree partially.
okay.
And I could add a statement in there for me that I feel that the word stifled is too strong.
So you agree the county council advised county council advised the board of supervisors to reject a potential $30,000 settlement. You agree with that?
I do.
But at the same time, we can have the video that tells, I watched the video and watched the video and watched the video, and never once did council say to reject the settlement. Council said, you're on shaky legal ground if you enter into a contract with an entity that doesn't exist. So that's not exactly the same as saying you shouldn't enter into this a settlement agreement. And there were other conversations leading up to this in closed session that I'm not going to divulge right now because we can't do that. But we never were advised not to settle this. We were advised not to enter into an agreement with an entity that didn't exist. So yes, I disagree that we were advised to reject a settlement. We weren't. We were advised not to enter into a contract with them at that time. So, I mean, to me, language matters. This language is incorrect. If they would have said council advised the board to, or put too much weight on the fact that TAA was not legally recognized at this time, or what, maybe we do something different, but council never advised us to reject the settlement. That is incorrect. There's no way you can find that that is correct because it's not. So, it just doesn't work. You can't say that we were advised to reject that without showing how. And yes, we did ultimately pay more. That's the only part of it that I don't agree with, but it's tied into because council told us to reject it, which council told us not to sign an agreement with them at that time. County council stifled information, casting doubt on councils. Okay, I'd have less issue with stifle as a word because council did say, okay, special counsel's not gonna, I have more problem with them assuming that our special counsel was gonna say, no, you better sign it right now. I mean, how can we know that our special counsel is going to disagree with council when they never made a statement? That is an assumption.
So
It's not a fact.
That's an issue right there. I mean, you're bringing up a whole nother point. And again, I'm not exactly sure, getting bogged down in this is starting to become really problematic because we have things that we really need.
Right.
I think that if we were to take this finding, we could take, again, the wording of it. I could rewrite that finding in a way that I agreed with. I'm not going to do it in a moment.
Well, we
Um,
can't rewrite their finding. We can
I
only
didn't.
rewrite.
Okay, so
their
I'm going to
response.
ask you to defer till I'm finished with my sentence.
Okay.
In fact, we're going to take a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 2:57.
Thank you.
Collecting a couple of thoughts. So supervisors, Carpenter Harris, Supervisor Gogan, Supervisor Lutweiler, if you have something to add.
Go ahead, Rick.
No, I think what I was hearing, it sounded like there was possibly a move towards disagree partially. And I think some of it is tied down to the specific words that are being used in the finding. And so therefore it makes it tricky to come up with the right words in the response. Which is a little troubling when we realize that we're not actually required to get to this response to these findings, but that's where we're spending a bulk of time.
We are, but I also feel like Supervisor Frazier's point is well taken. This
Mhm.
is a document
Yeah.
that's going to remain. And I feel like it is important, even though if we weren't required to respond to it, then no responses would have been fine. But the fact that responses were made, I do feel that they need to be thoroughly vetted by the five of us.
Agree.
Do you have something?
Partially disagree.
Okay, and do you want to say how you would like to word change any of?
So in here, in regards to stifling information and casting doubt, stifling seems to be hard, although when I look back and some of these things, and I know we can't go into it, flow from closed session to open session. When I look back, I didn't watch it 15 times like Dan, but I did watch it, and he's got great points of that day. But it's a flow of things that went along that obviously we can't talk about because it was closed session, but it was a cycle of things that happened that perhaps things were stifled or cast for doubt. And possibly special counsel would have disagreed with the advice given. But those are things that I saw in two different ways during the sessions that we had up to this date right here. That's understandable.
So try this. Your mic, is that what you're saying?
No, that's
Try
okay.
this on for size. If we said it's not working at all.
It's not working.
Oh, you just need to utilize it.
Jesus.
I would try this one on for size. County Council advised that the Board of Supervisors could not do business with TAA until their legal status as an entity, while their legal status as an entity was interrupted. That is true. The County Council failed to equally weight the option to move forward with a decision that day or to give the matter a number of days or weeks to see if more options were available.
Yeah, yes, but it's hard for me to think of this as that day. There was so much lead up to it, and
So we have to just look at the finding here.
got it.
And so what I'm
Agreed.
trying to do is see what they've said in their statement that I partially disagree with. Council advised the board to reject a potential settlement. I never heard advisement to reject the settlement. What I heard was an unequal weight.
Okay, so my question is not what you disagree with in their statement. If you're going to partially agree, can you point to a sentence in their finding number 7 that you agree with?
But I'm not saying I partially agree. I'm saying I
Well, you're saying you
disagree.
partially disagree, which in order to partially disagree, you would have to partially agree. So can you point to what you agree with?
I would say I agree that there was information that was stifled. I would say there was doubt cast on. I don't like this sentence, casting doubt on county council's advice.
That's because they're assuming that our special counsel would have given legal advice in an open meeting that would have cast doubt on the advice we were getting.
Council mentioned here whatsoever.
What would the would county council have been stifling that would have cast doubt on the opinion other than the question you raised to our special counsel that said when you were asking him for advice?
Right, but you also, I very much agree that words matter, and the words of special counsel are not in here. This is why I'm struggling with this, because I think it's a very poorly written sentence.
It was a very, very poorly written grand jury report. But if you, there, just going from that day, from watching that video, or from reading, from being there, what could you, what else could you take from that?
Actually, I now reading it differently, I can say I agree with this. Because if information was stifled, when I asked to have information be spoken, that was stifled. And that does cast doubt on then the advice that is being given.
But
Now, to say that then that causes county council to assume full responsibility for the case,
Yeah.
that is not true. So I would disagree with that.
so you agree with the statement that county council stifled information that would have cast doubt on council's opinion.
Correct?
In order to agree with that, you have to assume that our special counsel was going to disagree with council in open session and cast doubt on the opinion.
I don't think you can go there because special counsel was not brought into this statement. We can't put words in their mouth.
Well, there's no other. What else was there that was stifled?
So I think what I want to do is come up with a statement. If I'm going to say that I partially disagree, that I'm going to suggest a statement that I would put as the response, and you can take pieces of it or not. As a suggestion, I already read it. You can just decide how you feel about that. County council advised that the Board of Supervisors could not do business with TAA while their legal status as an entity was interrupted. The county council failed to equally weight the option to move forward with a decision that day or give the matter a number of days or weeks to see if more information were available. And to me, that's the information that was stifled. So that's the statement that I would agree with, whereas I partially disagree with what is listed in this finding. That's my opinion. That's one person's opinion, and I'm going to move on.
I'll make that-
Supervisor
I'll
Gogan,
make
what
that
is?
two persons' opinion, and I don't think county council's advice led them to assume full responsibility for the TA case.
So, at that. Not agreed. Okay, I would agree with that. Supervisor Carpenter Harris, what would you like to see done with this item?
Well, I'm sitting here trying to think of the right word. Feel like there was probably the word nudging keeps coming to mind, there was a nudging.
Mm.
But outside of that, I have to defer to those of you that were directly engaged.
Would you like me to add
sorry.
your statement?
No.
You're nudging to my statement? Okay.
May I add something to the board? The word that was used, stifling, is an emotionally charged word. I would advise against using that word at all.
Okay.
That's the word they use to us though, correct?
Well, and that's what our objective is, not to change their finding in order to make it correct. Our objective is, do we agree with what they said in their finding? And I do not. If you try to wordsmith that last one to make it say, well, okay, maybe their finding was that county council advised us not to enter into it, that county council stifled information, and that Either you have to agree with that or wholly disagree with it. We are not here to change their finding. Only they can do that. We can agree or disagree. We don't get to rewrite what they wrote. That's what I'm trying to say is if you don't wholly disagree, what is it that you agree with? And you said, well, county council stifled information, but not really stifled. They only didn't give full weight to other options. Then you disagree with what their finding is. We don't get to rewrite it. We get to agree or disagree.
Do we get to agree or disagree that one word may be used as a noun, a verb, an adjective? Maybe just that one word, like council just said, is an emotional word, and maybe it should have been taken as another word or taken out, and not that we can, but there's interpretations of that word. And right when this came down, I thought stifling too much. But I understand what they're trying to get through there. And maybe because of the interpretation of stifling being many different things, it's not the right word, but I don't think it's not meant to be put through in that type of way. There was some nudging, whatever you want to call it, but I think council is right that stifling could be used in different, I've interpreted different ways.
I've given my response. I mean, I feel strongly that findings of fact should be factual. So that's my take. And if you can't point to what's correct, then it's incorrect. So besides that, however you want to respond to it, I think we should try to get to the actual meat and bones of this, which is if we're having this much difficulty on the findings, we need to get down to the recommendations as soon as possible. And frankly, I don't know. I'm at a loss of why we're going through this line by line. My thought was that when this came up, it would be somebody would make a motion. If supervisors had issue with what my responses were, then we would have that discussion. I didn't have any idea that we're going to be going through this line by line. I
And
wouldn't have put
so
as much
that
in
would
at the
have
end.
been your decision a few months ago, but today it's mine. And so since these items are in here, I don't want to turn in a report that we disagree with the pieces that leading up to the end of it. And so we are doing this and we're going to try to get through this quickly. So we have heard your perspective and now we will hear Supervisor Lutweiler's perspective.
And what I'm hearing from the two of you is that there is some aspect of what you see in this finding that you agree with, even if it's not every word of any sentence, and you feel it's important in our response that we specify what that is. Is that's the reason that it's so important to change this? I'm just trying to make sure.
I'm not sure. Is it important to specify if we say we partially disagree with something? Is it required to say why?
No.
All right.
And then a finding we don't even have to respond to, I wouldn't think we'd have to get to.
Okay, well, you did. Okay, so would we like to just leave it as partially disagree and not state why?
You can put your statement, I didn't mind your statement at all, if you want to go with that.
I will read my statement again, and then we'll have the other two supervisors decide if they would prefer to have no statement at all, leave the statement as it is, or remove it and replace it with this statement. County Council advised that the Board of Supervisors could not do business with TAA while their legal status as an entity was interrupted. County Council failed to equally weight the option to move forward with a decision that day or to give the matter a number of days or weeks to see if more options were available. It is not agreed that County Council assumed full responsibility for the case.
So
Do you wish?
given the conversation that we just heard, I would say change the response to partially disagree and leave it at that.
Okay. What would you like to do? Either one of you.
I'll stay with that statement and partially disagree.
Okay.
That's fine.
Partially disagree is fine.
When we move to partially disagree, Supervisor Carpenter Harris, do you want to leave the statement as it is, remove the statement altogether, or replace the statement as read?
I'll leave it as it is.
You want to leave the statement that's written in the document as is.
Yeah, the way Dan wrote it. I'm sorry, Supervisor.
Okay, so now we need consensus because we have two people who want to leave it alone, two people who want to change it, and one person who wants to remove it altogether.
Yeah, just to clarify, my recommendation was just the response would be only partially disagree, nothing else.
Okay,
And
I
and my
could,
reasoning is that we're getting caught up in the words and the words will matter. So
Mhm,
if we add more words, then they have to really matter.
mhm.
And we're adding to the complexity of this. And if we really, the main statement is we partially disagree. If that's the, the vote, then I think that's enough and we don't get ourselves into more into the weeds if not necessary.
I could agree with that.
I'll agree with that.
Okay, done.
Sorry for making this the roughest day of your life.
It's not that.
Finding number 8, county council has been operating under the same contract for more than 7 years, whereas state government code and county policies state that the term of county council is 4 years. Response: disagree partially. State code states that county council term will be 4 years and until his successor is appointed. That's actually a direct quote right out of code. I agree with all of that. Supervisor Lutweller?
I'm fine with that.
Agree.
Okay. Finding number 9, the contract under which county council currently operates consists of base fees for assisting with certain county business, but also stipulates that the county council will bill for any litigation services at a rate of $200 per hour. This contractual structure appears to incentivize legal actions that promote litigation, or at least could discourage actions that avoid unnecessary litigation. Response: partially disagree. County council has an ethical duty to act in the best interest of the county. For me, I would leave partially disagree and remove the words.
Trying to change it, Joe.
Just remove the comment on the response. Nowhere in the finding are we talking about ethical.
No, but it's saying that it gives the incentive for legal actions to promote litigation, which state law requires that counsel act in the best interest of their client, which says that they cannot promote litigation that's not warranted. So that was my response, my reason for partially disagreeing. And that used to be a lot longer, right? That's the Reader's Digest condensed version.
Supervisor Lutweller?
I'm fine with it as it is.
I am as well.
I'll go with it. I think incentivize is too strong of a word there.
Recommendation number 1. We recommend that the Board of Supervisors abide by the state and county policy regarding transparency. While the government code recognizes the need to keep certain sensitive information confidential, the Brown Act makes it clear that secrecy is not intended to be the default mode of doing public business. Likewise, we recommend invoking attorney-client privilege selectively rather than as a blanket mechanism for the Board of Supervisors and Council to avoid accountability. Response: recommendation has been implemented. The current Board of Supervisors has abided by the Brown Act concerning closed sessions. The statement direction given to staff is sufficient when the board and council are discussing ongoing litigation and do not want to make public their legal strategy. Settlements voted on by members currently serving on the board have been made in public meeting and not in closed session.
I'm fine with that.
Sounds good.
Mhm. Recommendation number 2, we recommend considering establishing county council as a full-time salaried employee of the county. Cases of litigation that arise beyond the capacity of county council would then be managed through separate contracts with private attorneys. This business model would help to separate actions that lead to or discourage litigation from the financial reward in prosecuting litigation, thereby removing the appearance of a conflict of interest. Response: Recommendation will not be implemented because it is not reasonable at this time. Because the job of county council requires more than just an attorney, the county would also have to recruit and retain paralegal personnel and administrative staff. The cost for this would far exceed the average of $600,000 per fiscal year currently paid to the county council. Supervisor, what do you have thought?
Yeah, well, in general, I'm fine with the response. I may have worded something differently and not committed as much to exactly how it's spelled out for the reasons, but I agree that right now there's more advantages to disadvantages of having this be serviced in the way that it is
Okay.
versus dedicated staff.
Mhm.
I would agree. I do think the 600,000 average, it would ebb and flow through the years, so. Some years you save some years not, but I think it's fine. Too much money. You need to have a firm, I think.
Yes, I agree. We have such a hard time filling roles as it is, that having a firm is,
We hire any lawyers, somebody over here wants them.
Recommendation 3, if the county determines that retaining a contractor serve as county council is necessary, consider restructuring the contract to remove the appearance of a conflict of interest by decoupling ordinary county business from litigation. This could perhaps be done with 2 separate contracts with competing legal firms. Response recommendation will not be implemented because it is not warranted. Because county council cannot initiate litigation or enter into a settlement and must bring all settlement offers before the board, it is the responsibility of the board to ensure the council does not enter into avoidable litigation. Furthermore, because county council has a fiduciary relationship with the county, they are bound by law to work in the best interest of the county. Thoughts?
Agree.
I'm comfortable with that.
Supervisor Llewellyn?
Yeah, my inclination is to dig deeper into this and say that this is something that needs to be further considered about what the right approach is, because at least I have not been a part of any discussions about what our contracts are and what they should be and everything else. So I'm more open to this as a possible outcome, but I don't feel like there's a reason right now to commit to making a change because of these reasons. So I'm fine with stated as it is, because we can always revisit this.
Okay. And recommendation 4, if the county determines that county council must be retained through a contract similar to the current contract with Prentice Long, we recommend that such contracts be valid for a limited term, such as 4 years, and that bids from competing legal firms be solicited at the end of each term. Response recommendation will not be implemented because it is not warranted. Because the contract with county council allows the board to terminate the contract for many reasons or no reason, limiting the term of the contract is not necessary. The Board of Supervisors will, however, begin to administer the yearly performance evaluations that are required by the contract.
This is interesting. In my PSA 2 onboarding, got a great presentation by the director and executive director. And one of the things that was conveyed is that all of the services that they contract out are put through RFP every 4 years, all of them. Not because they think there's a problem with any of their service providers, but because that's a best practice that they implement to make sure that they're always current and aware of available resources and options and so on and so forth. So I do think it's appropriate for us to have defined terms, and I do think that we should have performance reviews, and I do think that we should have a best practice for RFPs that's not performance-based, it's best practice-based.
Deliverables, yes.
Mhm.
Dan, I'm open to your thoughts on that since you did a lot of research on this.
Well, I didn't do as much research on the RFP side of things. I just looked at a few legal, like county council type contracts. You, I see one thing that would definitely occur if we went out RFP is we would pay a lot more money. The price of everything goes up. I mean, it's like, we can go out for an RFP and get a whole bunch of proposals that are a lot higher than what we're paying now. My thought is whatever county council we have, and we have a contract right now, we do that performance evaluation. We do, which I didn't realize was actually required in the contract. And that's a requirement of the Board of Supervisors that has not been done in my term on the board. We've not fulfilled the contract, our contractual obligations. But if we're doing that performance review and if we're evaluating stuff as we go along and we have the ultimate authority to terminate that contract at any time for no reason, why do we need to go out for RFP every 4 years and just create more work for everybody that isn't required? If we have an issue that we can't resolve through a performance review, okay, let's go out for RFP and plan on hiring someone else. If we're just going to go out for RFPs so we can give our staff more stuff to do, I don't see the point. Honestly, I really don't. I think if you have somebody that's doing the job, you have a contract, you go with it. And we don't need to, we have the whole list of RFPs and RFQs on our website that aren't getting a whole lot of responses. So
Dan, say we did terminate for any reason or no reason. If we didn't have anybody in the can, we'll say, or a couple firms that, it would be difficult for me to say to Prentice Long or anybody, you're done. All right, now what are you gonna do? Oh, man, we'll let Liam do it. I would think we would need to have some people, at least some options. We don't want the interim to be too much by the time this firm leaves and this firm takes over. So I'm hesitant to let anybody go in Trinity County just because we don't have the backup generally. But if we had a few reasonable candidates, we'll say.
I'm sorry, I laughed, but the thought that popped into my mind when you said that is, I wonder what would happen if you ran that suggestion past your wife? You better have a few,
nothing past my wife.
you better have a few options in the background in case the first one don't work out. I mean,
Usually I just lie to her. It makes no difference.
We can't guarantee that everything's going to be perfect. And if we end up having some kind of issue with county council now, in the future, whenever, it doesn't matter who we're talking about as council either, whether it's Prentice Long or anyone else. If we have an issue, we'll have an issue that we have to resolve at that point. If we go out for RFP and we hire someone else, we're not going to immediately go out for an RFP and have somebody in our back pocket in case they don't work out and we can have to can them. So, I mean, I gave you my best analysis of what I thought of that recommendation. And
I understand. I get what you're saying. I just. It almost lends, and not saying anything about Prentice Long, but it almost lends you to be hesitant to terminate someone for all the reasons that we have all these openings here. We don't get applicants, we don't get qualified applicants, maybe we don't even get any applicants. So you kind of, always hesitate because we know what we said, we generally don't pay enough, blah, 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 all the stuff we hear all the time. So it's almost, and I don't want to say the deck's stacked towards, I'm just going to say Prentice Law, I don't mean this, towards these people because it's so difficult for us to find other competent people in this county.
And if the people that we have are doing the job, why would we go looking for someone else? I mean, that's what it's like.
I'm not,
If we hire a new, when our new CAO comes on in April, we're not going to put out an RFP for CAO candidates. We're not going to go, we have someone and we're going to ride that horse as long as we can, because there should be, the other thing is there should be some sort of, if you take a job like that, there should be some kind of job security that as long as you're doing the job, you have the job, not that 4 years from now, somebody that, last year, especially, how would you have liked to have been somebody who had worked for the county for 7 or 8 years, and all of a sudden the county goes out for RFP and you have to prove why you should get to keep your job to a board that's made up of 3 people who you've never met and 2 people that are there from your prior time. There should be some kind of job security involved with people working. And I don't mean we shouldn't be able to terminate them, but there should be an expectation that as long as they're doing their job, they can continue to do their job. I have no problem with that. If I go to work for somebody, I expect to work with them until I'm finished the job or we decide mutually it's over. So I really don't see the benefit of going out for RFPs every 4 years, especially on something like this.
I will take that back. RFP is probably too strong a word. I just would like to have some knowledge of time it would take to get somebody in this position. And I know it's a tough question. It's an open-ended question in a way, but it is the limiting factor to what happens here in Trinity County, is that you keep X person for longer than you'd like because you don't know what you're getting, or you may not get anybody.
So I think the important thing to look at here is process.
Mhm.
What is the process and what are your options? And so if you, RFP is the process if you want to see what your options are. So it's not something is too strong a word. That's just what the process is. So we've seen in other entities, in other portions of the governmental entity, that that's just a normal piece of the process, is that every 4 years, this is what's done to take a look at your professional services and see what your options are. In the business sector, it's very normal. This is how things are run. That was my world for many years, just knowing that after a certain amount of time, and we knew what those windows were, you would again step up to the plate and present what you have to offer. And maybe nobody else steps up to the plate and you're uncompeted. Or maybe somebody else does. And then you hope that what you offered, was preferable.
And may I address the board?
Please.
The idea of going out to explore other options, you're going to get a quote that's for today. And if something should happen to the current county council, you're going to go back to that person and it's not going to be the same number. It's going to increase. And so it is, I agree with the chair and I agree with Mr. Frazier, Supervisor Frazier, that it's a waste of effort. That's it.
Fair enough.
Looking for someone new, I don't think that, I mean, personally, if I was county council and we went out for RFPs, that would be like me telling my wife I'm gonna go look for somebody to replace her before I kick her to the curb. You know what I mean? It's like, I would take it as an insult if I'd been doing a job for somebody for this long and then they say, I'm gonna see what other options I got. You better hope it's a good one because I'm out of here. And at that point, and that's kind of personally, that's how I feel about it. It's like, if you guys are looking for other options, you better find one.
I'd like to hear from Supervisor Carpenter Harris.
Thanks, Rick. I'm listening. A song lyric comes to mind and it says, I'd rather have nothing than a whole lot of something I don't need. And so the idea of not taking care of business because we're afraid of who might replace that person concerns me a little bit. But I also thoroughly understand the idea of just having an idea of who may be out there. I don't know that you necessarily need to go as far as an RFP, but I also think that just having a general knowledge of what's available is good. But I also, I really believe in performance evaluations, and I think they're an amazing tool. And I think a lot of work can be done when you are consistent with those. And the fact that that has not been done is a little alarming. And I would stand firmly on the fact that we need to enlist those annual performances and do them well. And I think that inside of those is when you will find out whether or not you need to look or you don't. But I agree with Supervisor Frazier that if someone is doing their job, then you should trust yourself and your evaluations and trust them in their performance capacity. So I would go with as it's written. Okay.
I'll just state, and then I'm fine with whichever way the board decides, but my experience maybe is different just because I've been on the receiving and issuing end of RFPs for my entire career. That's just what happened. I had a national account of 15 people that supported a customer, and they spent millions and millions and millions of dollars with us, and they still, based as a fiduciary responsibility of their company, would put that out for bid on occasion. And it was not because I was not doing my job supporting them as a national account director, and I didn't take it personally. I just knew that was them doing their fiduciary role. And then on the other end, I've been in the position where we were doing those same kind of RFPs for the hardware we bought, the software we bought, things like that, just to make sure that we were staying current with what were the options that were available to us, what were the best practices that were out there. And sometimes we chose to continue with who we had, and sometimes we didn't. And sometimes I won those RFPs that I was on the receiving end of, and sometimes I didn't. But I completely understand what people are saying, that we certainly have staff that is already overburdened since we're so understaffed with the requirements that we have. And I do understand that it can be taken personally. In my view, I'm not putting this forward as we need to do this because. I'm saying if we do it, it's because it is a best practice to do. And so it would be the board just deciding it is a best practice for our responsibility to make sure we have the best option for county council. If that's not where the board feels, I'm coming in with a lot more corporate background than I am government background. So I'm open to other people's opinions on that. And I hear what you guys are saying. So.
Yeah, I hear the tenor, the heart behind what is being said here as well. I think that for me, I lean more toward, I feel like it's part of our responsibility to the constituents to make sure that we know what our options are. And that you're not gonna know those options unless you go find out what those options are. I think that to say that we would put that responsibility on staff isn't necessarily the case, as with the other items that we've discussed today, that responsibility can be put on one or two board members to create that. And I do see that as an option of just responsible management, which is a piece of our job.
Let's put it this way, we're put up for RFP every 4 years.
Yes, we are, aren't we?
Mhm. And unless we are, no one, we simply can't know. If we left ourselves if our positions were left in our seats until someone kicked us out, you would never know if somebody wanted to run against you, and somebody else may have qualities that exceeded what you were able to provide. So I do see it as an option. I also think that there is some value in supporting the request of a group of people who have looked into something, and they obviously have reason for their standing. And I think that there is something I think important about honoring pieces of what has been requested. So I put that out there as well.
So guess we just need to.
I just want to reiterate the fact that I strongly believe in the yearly performance evaluations. And I think that it's within those that we would determine a prompting to a greater investigation or research into what is available.
Mhm.
And I think that that's important to know what we might be missing.
Mhm.
I think that's important, but I also believe that it's within the act of doing the performance evaluations that you will discover some of that.
Mhm. Okay.
I agree, especially with the last thing said. We need to instill, I don't know if it's in a contract, it's yearly or it's every 6 months,
Yearly.
but I don't know what's in the
Annual, right.
contract, if it's annual or not.
Yeah, it is.
Annual,
Annual,
we certainly should. It hasn't been done in my 2+ years, so absolutely, why not?
And that was why I added that into my response, because I think that if we fulfill our obligations that are in that contract, then there's no reason that we would need to go out to RFP every so many years, because we know what's going on and we're telling council what we expect, rather than never. And it actually states in the contract that we're to provide that in writing. I mean, and we have not done that. I think that's the action that should be taken, is that we do what we're supposed to. And then as far as the Chair Cox, what you were talking about, our responsibility to I'm assuming you meant the grand jury I have some to speak to that, but that is in discussion of the responsibilities of the grand jury. So I think we need, before I dive into that, I would want to have a motion in a second, and then we can discuss the global perspective of this grand jury report.
Maybe another day.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of done. All right. So if there is no further discussion on recommendation 4, is everyone feeling like they want to leave it how it
Everyone wants
is?
to leave how it is, right?
yes, I'm fine,
Okay.
yes.
All right. So we have been through the entire report. So I would entertain a motion. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, I already did public comment at the beginning. Okay, I'm good. All right.
So I move that we approve the response as amended during our discussion. Read out every one of those changes that we made? Or do we have those recorded?
She's got them.
I feel like they're captured.
Everybody good with?
Mhm.
Okay.
I'll make a second.
All right. We have a motion and a second.
We're going to approve with amendments to response number 5, or finding number 5 and finding number 7.
Right. And would like to engage in some further discussion
Okay.
because I do appreciate the responsibility and the time that the grand jury puts in. However, I was very disappointed with this grand jury report on multiple levels. And it came up in the past in public comment, back and forth between Supervisor Groves and the writer of the grand jury report and the chairman of the grand jury. Then in the Trinity Journal, this grand jury report to me is not correct. I mean, it's not well done. And it comes off more as a hit piece and a personal attack. I mean, it actually names by name our county council in this grand jury report. Not even by the firm, but by name. It calls out Margaret Long by name in the grand jury report. It seems to me more like the grand jury was thinking that they were a criminal grand jury and they were looking for some kind of crime rather than a civil grand jury. But at the same time, it's like they're trying to play by two different sets of rules. I spent more time trying to figure out what and how to respond to this than you ever should have to. And I have a problem with the whole thing. I really do. I struggled greatly with responding because it seems like there was no, whether it was I mean, yes, you can take a letter that and look at it. It was, I can't even remember the word, the anonymous letter. So, okay, most outfits I looked at, the grand juries say, okay, if you send us an anonymous letter, we can look into that. But generally they don't because they can't follow up. All right. I don't have a problem with the fact that it's an anonymous letter so much as it seems like it was pointed, like it was directed, like it was an attack rather than trying to figure out what the real underlying issues were. We never got it in the back and forth here or in the grand jury report, but in the Trinity Journal, the guy who wrote it said, this is not an attack on county council. This is about the board's contract with county council. Well, they forgot to mention that until the very, very, very end in the recommendations that we change our contract. If the grand jury report would have mentioned, hey, your contract is not good and you're not abiding by your contract, I would have had no problem with that. But to have it an attack and based on findings that weren't all factual and pointed statements rather than there was always a point like to every statement that I had a problem with. And if it would have been your contract is terrible, you need to revisit your contract, I have no problem with that. The biggest issue I found is that we haven't abided by the contract. That's not what the grand jury report says. And I had a hard time responding when I didn't know, should I respond to what the author and the chairman of the grand jury said in open session and public comment? Should I respond to what was written in the Trinity Journal, or should I respond to the actual grand jury report? And that's why I tried very hard to respond only to the words that were in this report and precisely, because that's the only way I could get that right in my mind, because it's a convoluted mess. And I really, really struggled with it. And I hope I don't get tasked with anything anywhere near this again in my tenure. That's it.
Thank you for your
Thank
effort.
you very much for the job we did. The one, I guess I'd add to this is it seems to think that you think it was kind of a witch hunt or something like that. But there was 20 people or 19 people on the grand jury. And I can understand you could talk a couple, 3 people in there, not like me. But 20 people, I think it's hard to talk to 20 different people and go, hey, we're gonna go after Rick. So I think some people are gonna go, oh, no, why would you do that? I would take the opposite stance. If you told me, hey, we're going after Rick, I'd say, geez, I'm gonna try to look for the better things. I don't want to just hunt someone down. I would like to find the good things too. So I don't think it was a witch hunt.
I'm not saying it was a witch hunt. I'm saying the hardest part for me was that a lot of it was that it was directed, it was pointed. It wasn't, I mean, you can go into a conversation and you can ask questions that make you, but you're not asking the question, you're trying to get your answer. And that's what this felt like to me, is that it wasn't really looking for the broad picture. And if we're not really, and that wasn't in the report, that was only in the Trinity Journal. If we were really looking at the contract, this is terrible. And so, I mean, personally, I struggled with it. I just wanted to let you guys know. So.
I was just gonna say, conversation could go on, but I would love to see us come to a vote on this and move on. And perhaps what we should do is invite the right person to come present to the board about best practices for grand juries and their reports, so that we are fully informed about what to expect going forward, and put that on a future agenda. But I don't think the discussion we're having right now is going to change what we're voting on right now. And we have
Don't believe
closed
so.
session still to do. And 10 minutes, this room's supposed to be used for something else.
Correct.
Motion made by Rick was to approve with amendments to response findings for number 5 and number 7. Okay. Supervisor Carpenter Harris,
Aye.
Supervisor Lutweiler,
Aye.
Supervisor Gogan,
Aye.
Supervisor Frazier,
Aye.
Chairman Cox.
Thank you.
All right, so having already read the closed session items and already received public comment on them, I believe we can just move right into closed session. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay, and thank you for your service. Appreciate it. All
Thank you.
right. And we will adjourn the open session portion of this meeting.